Okay, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. As I said, thank you to Nature Calgary for allowing us to present, especially Ann Belton and the rest of the board for organizing this event each year. Before I begin, I'd also like to say thank you to a few people that really helped me out this year. Of course, Phil Cram for kind of passing the torch off to me. Some of you may know that I kind of shadowed him last year to understand how he reaches out to people, collects the data, does the adjustments, makes all those fantastic media appearances, those types of things. I also want to put a huge thank you out to Lara Fitzpatrick for assisting with the data compilation and building a fantastic spreadsheet that allows me to sort the information and better understand some of the trends that we can identify historically. Also, thank you to Bob Lefebvre for helping to spearhead the feeder watchers. It's a huge job. All the captains for the feeder watchers did an excellent job this year in submitting their information. All of the section captains for the Calgary Circle, particularly John McFall, who really took the north section off my hand. I thought I could do it on my own and was pretty quickly proven wrong. So thank you to John for that. And I also want to thank Jesse McGinnis and Shad Manywounds at Sutina for setting us up with the permits to survey W10. So that's the past 2 years I've been fortunate enough to do that and was happy to welcome in some new teammates this year. And a final thank you to all of the participants, feeder watchers, all of the captains, just for making this event so successful this year. The Calgary Count Week this year was from December 16th to the 22nd, right before the huge cold blast that hit us. December 19th was our count day, and we had some great temperatures that day, I would say. There was a low of -13 and a high of -10. Hardly any wind, but a little bit of overcast. So we were able to spot birds on the water, in the air, and in the trees, and it was an excellent day out in the fields. So I pulled a couple images from Google Earth here. The first one, it's as far back as I can go with the satellite imagery that they provide. But I know last year, lots of people were asking, well, you know, Fish Creek's not in the circle and I live in this new community down south, but I'm not in, so how can I participate? And as we all know, the circle can't really be altered. But of course, the land itself has been dramatically changed. So I want you to notice kind of Nose Hill Park up here, a little bit in the northeast, and particularly in the west, because these changes have been dramatic over time. So I'm sorry to all the people that live outside of the circle now, but had you been here in 1984 or sooner, you would have been inside most likely. We're happy to accept you as a field member, but unfortunately feeder watchers are excluded from that. So with these major land changes, I'll just go back to 1984 again and 2021. The major issues is that urban sprawl is encroaching into the surrounding rural environment and encompassing some of the major natural areas that we have, like Nose Hill Park. This is kind of how we organized the circle. So we had 34 sections with 126 people going after various parks, neighborhoods, golf courses, industrial areas. We really had strong coverage throughout the circle this year, which I'm very happy to see. Although we have some of these really, really small sections, at the end of the day, that data is kind of amalgamated into what they formerly were. So these are more or less subsections that have been created over time. But I would like to be able to say consistently that, for example, all of these north sections, they're still intact. and we just have to add that data together. So that'll take some time for me to compose, but I hope to be able to deliver some more kind of long-term trends within these sections over time. I want to mention the graph at the bottom of the page here for participants. So I have no way of knowing historically how many feeder watchers had ever participated. Audubon really only kind of takes into account the field surveyors. So I've kept it consistent here. And we had 126, as I said, which is just a little bit lower than previous years. But I would say we are nearing kind of our average over the past 10 years with that. I also wanted to touch on the methods that were used this year, because this was something that was a little bit different than how Phil had been doing it in the past. Most of you know me through the promotion of various citizen science or community science apps within the Calgary area. So I really wanted to put a lot of emphasis on eBird this year. And luck had it that eBird had been kind of piloted in the 2021 May species count. And about a month before the Calgary count this year, eBird introduced these trip reports. So this year we asked all of the field teams to submit their data to us. And in total, there was 118 checklists that were shared on December 19th. The rest of the circle sections either used the template for their bird data, but all of the sections eventually submitted a template that included their effort and mammal sightings and the species details. Feeder watchers, this year we asked them to submit by phone and email to their feeder watcher captains. And we had 136 residences, which I can show you in a moment here, that counted birds that day and sent them in. So I'm very grateful to everyone that shared this. And if you'd like to kind of investigate this data a little bit closer on your own, you can go to eBird and look up the checklist 19177. So I'll put the link in the chat at the end if you want to explore that checklist. Also, I sent out a notification to anybody who submitted a checklist. So if you have any photos in the checklist that you submitted, by accepting that trip report, those will be included in the project. So my background is in geography, and I wanted to kind of take a bit of a geographical approach to this. So what you're seeing on the right side are the circle sections. The darker the blue, the more feeder watchers are found within that section. So you can see primarily around kind of the reservoir area in the south and up in the Edgemonts northwest there. So N18, which is right at the top, or sorry, N9 right at the top, dark blue, actually had 18 feeder watchers inside of there. One other thing I was doing, I've had people ask, can we have too many feeder watchers? And the answer that I would say is no. So what I've kind of devised is a system for isolating feeder watcher residences that are within 150 meters of one another. And this year there was 23 residences that were more or less side by side. So it turned out to be 11 groups, or what I refer to here as community birds. And it's really interesting when you look at the numbers, because you can actually see that, for example, in this area, there's 3 houses. They counted the exact same birds, more or less. So what I do for that is kind of, I isolate the addresses and I look at the counts, and then I just take the highest count and essentially make that just one residence. In some of these other sections throughout the circle, there are people that one house may have saw one thing and the other house saw another thing, but we only take the highest count for each species between the two of those. We accept the participants and the survey hours that they did. Some of the other kind of analysis, I guess, are just the reductions or adjustments that I learned from Phil. And I really hope to do a lot more kind of geographic analysis over the next year, so we're well prepared for next year in terms of understanding our circle and environment a bit better. So the final count for our birds this year in Calgary was 71,468. I haven't seen numbers from everywhere across Canada, but I feel like this could be one of the highest counts so far. That's made up of 73 species that were found on count day, and we had 4 count week birds. So the count week birds were a buried thrush, a prairie falcon, a killdeer, and as of yesterday, we have added a greater white-fronted goose to the count week birds. I should note that there were other reports of other species during count week that we have not accepted because we don't have any evidence to support the identification made by birders. But I will be sending out the list of all the numbers to people on Friday. So if you have any additional birds you want to add in, this is the last chance you get. So the numbers you see on the screen have been adjusted. And we have some nice photos here from Arthur that I wanted to share. I'll talk a bit more about the species, but we also had some interesting finds, like a few hybrids and leucistic birds, including this crow that was found here. There was also this mystery bird that was identified by a feeder watcher. Well, let's say unidentified by a feeder watcher, and it required a bit of reconnaissance. So Bob went up the other day and took a fantastic photo of this new count circle record, which is a fox sparrow. So in 70 years, this is the first time we've had a fox sparrow in the Calgary count, on count day especially. And maybe Bob can clear it up in the chat, but I believe he said it was only the 4th time a fox sparrow had been counted in December. So that's the big reveal, guys. I hope you like it. Okay, so I've got this, it's a bit clustered, this graph, I suppose, but this is a graph showing the number of species for the entire duration of the Calgary count. The average number of species over the 70 years is 51. So I wouldn't really hold that at face value because pretty much up until 1969, we just didn't really have the participant numbers to really survey the number of birds within the count circle. So it was likely much higher, but we're basing that off, or this average off of some of those early numbers. You can see as with time, we've added more participants. You can't see those on this map, I get, but you can see that we've added more and more birds over the years. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is the fact that we have a lot of open water within the city. We've also, in terms of the built up urban environment, that helps birds that I refer to as urbanophiles, birds that do very well in urban environments such as black-billed magpie, black-capped chickadee, northern flickers, rock pigeon, European starling, those types of things. So in the past 10 years, when we kind of look at that, the average number of species is about 67. And this year we had 73 is what that should say. I put the question mark at the top here, nearing the threshold, because each year we're only adding about 1 new species per year. And they're very rare in between. Like we may never see them again, such as the hummingbird last year, or perhaps even the fox sparrow this year. Those could be once in a count circle lifetime that they're happening. But you can see that our numbers for individual birds are still going up. We're right at the peak here, sitting at just over 70,000. And again, I say kind of the threshold because you can see that even with the participants going up, and we're kind of leveling off around 150-ish, that we're really not finding new species within our count circle. So the ones that we are finding are kind of vagrants. The party hours, I only have these going back to 1979 currently. Had some issues trying to graph it. We're also missing some data in terms of party hours for earlier count dates, but I hope to collect those soon. So yeah, what you're seeing here are primarily just the field teams, and feeder watchers are not included in this. But the total field party hours in the field this year, was 273, and with all of the feeder watchers, 345 hours watch. Some record high counts we had this year. One of my favorite birds is the Townsend Solitaire with a record high at 18. We're also sitting at a new record for bald eagles. So the raw number before adjustments was actually 72, which was quite high. And after applying Phil's adjustments, plus also referring back to anybody's notes on the life stage of the bald eagle, the time it was sighted and flight path, I've adjusted that back to 55. So we're also, I'll show you the graph for the house finch in a little bit here, as well as the northern flicker, but these are all record high counts. And you can see that a lot of these are urbanophiles, as I said. I like to mention a couple of these unusual species. So these are birds that have occurred less than two times or less in the past 10 years. We had a snowy owl this year, not officially documented by the team that was surveying this area, but it was supported by photographs, and the location was confirmed. We had a white-crowned sparrow, very beautiful white-crowned sparrow in the Weaselhead Park. I was very pleased to hear about the sharp-tailed grouse. We had 3 of those. We haven't had any, we've had 3 the last time in 2016. And the last time before that was 1997. We also had both tundra swans and trumpeter swans. 1 tundra swan. A ruddy duck, which is a bit unusual, and we're happy to have it, and a Wilson snipe. So Chris Dirtnell took this great photo of the sharp-tailed grouse, and you can check it out here. So kind of going back to that map that I showed you right at the beginning, Nose Hill is where we had traditionally found sharp-tailed grouse within the city. And as kind of that urban development encompassed the park, lots of disturbance in terms of just presence of people and their pets. We haven't seen any sharp-tailed grouse there in some time. Probably about 8 weeks ago, I put out a call on Twitter asking if anybody wanted to make a guess at the number of waxwings. Most people expected them to be in about the 7,000 to 9,000 range, but I'm happy to say that they were way up this year. This is an adjusted number. The total count was actually closer to 19,000, but we have reports of potential duplications of flocks being counted. So that's why it's sitting at 15,676. And when we look back, that looks pretty consistent, except for some of these high years in the early 2000s. The bald eagles, we've been talking more and more about them each year in Calgary about how they seem to be more present. Jim had mentioned that mallards are their favorite food. And I wonder if our Calgary count data actually would support that. When we look at mallards, the long-term trend, we did have a bit of a high year for mallards, but the actual population of mallards over time really has not changed at all. So I'm wondering if there's, maybe it's not the number of mallards, but perhaps the locations of which they're congregating that's perhaps influencing bald eagle populations. We also saw that Canada geese are still going up quite a bit. And I feel like this is more parallel to where the bald eagles are at. So I would suggest maybe that bald eagle's favorite meal is actually Canada goose and not the mallard. But another really good year for mallards, just under 19,000. Another common backyard bird, house finch, just through the roof this year at 2,000. So we're looking at, an increase of about 800. I know when I've been out birding a few times this year, I've seen some, flocks of around 30 of these things at one time. So maybe it has something to do with the quality bird seed we're picking up from our local shops. But yeah, this is really incredible to see how well they're doing in Calgary. So yeah, 2015 this year for that. Some of these other kind of urbanophiles that I wanted to show you. These bird numbers are growing as our city grows. And they're all doing quite well. So black-billed magpie is still another pretty strong year, up near 2,500. Black-capped chickadee is continuing to climb. This is close to a record year, if not. The house sparrows, there's been a couple spikes, but we're still kind of climbing over time. And another one of my favorite birds is northern flicker. And we see here that the numbers are just exponentially growing over the past 20 years or so. And these birds I have included all the way back to count number 1 because we do have sufficient data for those. So here's our list of all the birds that we saw this year. Made a couple notes and I'll try and point them out on here, but obviously you can see that these big numbers just jump out. So when we're looking at, Canada geese, mallards, rock pigeons, Bohemian waxwings, and house finches, those types of things, it's not hard for us to achieve, 70,000 birds in a single day count. There were a couple strange things that I noticed this year. One, our golden eyes were about half of last year, which is kind of unexpected. We did have these swans, as I mentioned, still a couple wood ducks hanging around, which is interesting. What you don't see on this list are the birds that we didn't have this year. And I think there's a few people that might be happy about what we didn't see because these birds are often disputed. I wish that we would have seen them, but these birds are purple finch. So we had 0 purple finch. And I know it's been a topical debate the past few years. We had no Cooper's hawks, but we did have 4 sharp-shinned hawks, and we actually had 6 northern goshawks, which is fairly impressive. I'll just draw your attention over to white-winged crossbill. We had no red crossbills this year, which is a bit unfortunate, but it looks like it's fairly consistent across most of the counts with within Alberta this year that red crossbills were way down and not huge numbers of white-winged crossbills, which you'll see here at 41. The sharp-tailed grouse is nice, but I do miss the fact that we had missed our ruffed grouse. So it's a bit unfortunate. We know a couple places in the city where they're usually or commonly found, but just didn't work out for us this year. One of the waterfowl that is fairly common, not always consistent, but is northern pintail that we didn't get this year. So if we had had all of those birds, it would have been a record year count for our species list. A couple other interesting things. We do hold a record for merlins, but we're nowhere near that this year. We're about half of the merlins that we have for records. So I didn't see any other mammal sightings for the other counts, but I did want to pull this up. I'm still working on trying to build up the historical database for mammal sightings. Obviously, we ask you guys when you're out there to count these things, and we want to understand these populations a bit more. Eastern gray squirrels, we all know them well. They're still dominating within the urban environment. Not sure how I feel about these domestic rabbits. 70 still alive in December is a bit unfortunate. They do eat a lot of native plants, and we still see that our red squirrels are few and far between. We have less than 70 squirrels according to this census this year. So next time you see one, appreciate that moment, because there's way fewer than you think in the city, and they're only found in a few areas. A couple other good records that I'm pleased with in terms of mammals. Snowshoe hare, it's not all that common within the city, but with enough watchful eyes, it looks like we can find a few. Coyotes are pretty strong at 25. Bobcat, they're a little bit more elusive, only at 2. We didn't get any beavers this year, but we did settle for the next best thing, a muskrat. And happy to say we got 1 moose. So the next count is going to be almost a year from now, December 18th. So please mark your calendars. I'm happy to stick around for a couple questions in terms of Calgary numbers. I can pull up some other data if you'd like. And I'd just like to say thank you to everyone again, and thank you very much. So I'll just open the chat here and see if there's any questions here. Okay, so it's the 4th fox sparrow ever reported on eBird in Alberta in the winter months of December through February. So very strong month bird for Alberta, as well as the Christmas bird count in Calgary. We've got somebody asking about great blue heron and that special heron in the Inglewood Bird Sanctuary. There was no herons this year, which is what we would normally expect. The special heron was the yellow crowned night heron, but I don't know if that's been seen in some time now. So we've got Jim disputing that he said that mallards are a favorite food of eagles, but we'll let it slide. Nobody really knows. Who won the Battle of Alberta? Well, I was fortunate enough to reach out to the Toronto Nature Club to find out how the Toronto Circle did. And I'm happy to say that we have about 3 times more birds in Calgary than was counted on the Toronto bird count. In terms of Edmonton, one unique thing for them, they only had 2 Canada goose this year. I think their species were a little bit lower, but the individuals were kind of around the 20 to 25,000 mark, if I'm not mistaken. But very impressive in terms of the numbers for Calgary's count. And as I said, I feel that it could be, perhaps a record for number of individuals across Canada, but we'll have to wait and see. Okay, so here's an interesting question. I did talk about the methods a little bit, and we have a question here asking if the compilation effort was reduced by having many counters use eBird. So the short answer is yes and no. It was great to be able to have almost a live feed of the bird numbers coming in. But one a couple issues that I ran into was that I stopped getting notifications on eBird and had to resort to only my email notifications from eBird, which meant that I had to go through probably 150 emails to ensure that I accepted every single eBird checklist. The other issue is that although we tried our best to inform people on how to submit their checklists, often maybe half of the checklists were submitted with information that required follow-up. So I think we're on the right trajectory, but as a pilot, we can definitely use a little bit more improvement to become more efficient over time. I also would like to mention that I am totally fine with leaving some of the historical, the more traditional ways of accepting counts. So whether that be by phone or by email, I want it to be as accessible to everyone as possible. And I feel like with more analysis, these kinds of little tricks, that we can encourage more people within our communities to become involved. As I've mentioned over the past, long time, like these types of citizen science events are vital to understanding our environment. But at the end of the day, they're very much about engaging with our communities and our neighbors. So I would hope that we could get more people involved with our count over time. I'll just find the eBird checklist and put that in the chat for anyone who would like it here. Okay, so the trip report is in the chat there, and I've made it available to the public. I will post the final results in the chat here, but anybody who submitted a checklist, you're welcome to accept the request to participate in this. And at that time, you can add comments and those types of things. You can also review the photos that people took. There's some really good ones of harlequin ducks, the white-crowned sparrow, golden-crowned kinglets, those types of things. Yeah, Bob has mentioned one other thing. So the compilation was also challenging because traditionally we would meet up and have a bit of a party and collect the numbers all live. Due to COVID, we opted not to do that this year. So we hope that in the future we can do some type of bird count party.